What is audit trail? The purpose of audit trail is you want to track who changed a particular record in the database, who changed the data, and when the data was changed. And in terms of doing that, you want to be able to do that at a variety of time, basically, in your application. You want to handle that when the data is being inserted. You want to say, who inserted the data, when it was created, and so on. And then you want to be able to also keep track of any updates. Now, obviously, audit trail may mean different things to different people. A simple audit trail is essentially tracking date, time, and last user who changed it. More complex audit trail may involve actually keeping a copy of the previous data, keeping a journal, keeping a log effectively, so that not only do you see who changed, but what changed, if you will. So here we are tracking who and when. We are not tracking what. If you want to do what, it requires a little bit more involvement, basically. We won't go over that. So in this particular case, I want to show you how to do who and when. Like anything else, there are many ways of skinning the cat. Here we have 3 different ways. Like everything else, everything has advantages and disadvantages. The first way of doing it is using hidden fields on the page. Very easy to do, and you can do it within Iron Speed Designer. Requires no code customization, but it has to be done on every page that allows editing or adding of data, and may have some look and feel disadvantages, because if you're hiding fields, you still are taking up some space on the page, basically. A second method, which is essentially that allows you to do it also on the user interface, allows you to write a few lines of code, but it gives you much more flexibility in doing that. So you can do more complex things, like, for example, you can essentially set more fields, not just created on and created by, but also, if you wanted to keep track of additional information, like maybe collect the data that was changed and concatenate that and save that in some additional field, for example, you're able to do that through user interface customization. But again, the disadvantage is that you have to do it on many pages effectively. The third way, which is probably the most flexible, but requires a little bit more understanding on your part of the code model and how you would be able to do that, and that is to essentially change it as a data access layer. And you can essentially do that in one single place for every table. So for example, if you have a customer table and you want to implement audit trail, you would implement it in one place, and boom, it's basically no matter how many pages you create to edit that customer record or add that customer record, all of them will go through the data access layer. So all of them effectively will go through this audit trail functions, and they will get updated. But of course, in some cases, there are disadvantages for that. Because you are in a data access layer, the strict rules of not passing data between, not sharing data between user interface layer and data access layer by convention may hinder your ability to do certain things. Like, for example, if you want to set some values from the user interface side into the data access layer, you have to now figure out alternatives of how to pass this data because you are 10 levels deep and you don't have necessarily access to the web page where the user entered some data maybe. So in order to do, if you want to keep track of, or if you want to have access to the user interface data, you may have to save it in sessions, and you may have to then retrieve it back in the data access layer in order to do these things. So this is by convention. You don't want to share UI data at the data access layer. That's why these restrictions come into place. But of course, if you so choose, you can pass all of those things if you like, but then you'll be breaking the conventional rule of keeping each one of those layers independent. Let's quickly cover 1 and 2, but focus on number 3 primarily. Number 1, how do you do that? Very easy to do. Imagine, let's say these are the 4 fields that you want to set effectively. What you can do effectively is just have those fields on the layout, and let's do that in Iron Speed Designer. So I'm going to switch over to Iron Speed Designer. I have an Add Employees page over here, And if I so choose, I can go to the Add Employees page, and then you will see that I already, actually I don't have the updated fields over here. Sorry, I must be using a different table over here. I did not hook up properly. But let's say, for example, that we are going to use the hire date as the update, birth date as the created date, and hire date as the updated date. What I could simply do is double-click this field. And here are the 3 changes that I need to make. First and foremost, I don't want it to be a text box because I don't want the user to change it. So I'll change it to a literal. After changing it to a literal, I'll then hide it. I don't want it to be visible. But then after I hide it, I want to make sure that literals normally do not get saved into the database. So I need to click the Save Field Value to Database. And again, I've described this in the presentation, which you will have access to after this webinar, so you don't need to take notes immediately at this point in time. Then I'll switch over to the initial value, and I can just simply select its current date and time, or current date, whichever I prefer effectively over here. And that is how, as simple as is to create essentially an audit trail in the easiest possible way. I can also, for certain other fields, like let's say, for example, if I had wanted to see who actually created it, I would effectively select a logged in user ID here. Now the reason why this is disabled is because I did not turn on security in this application. So because I don't have security, I don't have the logged in user over here. But if you had turned on security, you would have this available, and you could simply select that and save that value. And of course, I can repeat the same thing for the update date and updated by as well. So that's method number 1, if you will. Go back to method number 2, and I'll skip through these things. Okay, so on method number 1, I could also use custom functions, and here is an example of a custom function that you can use essentially. Instead of using logged in user ID, I could use get login ID function, and this is how I would call it. Okay, method 2, which is I would override the get UI data. Remember when we talked about the calling hierarchy, we said that get UI data's job is to retrieve the data from the user interface into a record that will be eventually saved into the database. So what we want to do is override the get UI data, call the base get UI data in order to do all of its work, and then add a little bit of our own code in order to accomplish that. So as we mentioned, there is a calling hierarchy. Get UI data is called from save data in order to retrieve the data from the user interface, and then it eventually calls record.save to actually save that data. So all I would need to do is call my base get UI data, and then I will use the data source variable. Data source will always be the record that I am currently working on. So I can always do me.datasource.createdOn, which is the field. Data source will always be of the same data type as the record that you're updating. So data source may be typed to a product's record, or a customer's record, or an order's record, or an employee's record based on the panel that you are on. So the get UI data will automatically always have data source typed appropriately. So I could do me.datasource.createdOn and set that value to date time now, for example. So that's the second method that I could use. And of course, I can add my own custom code over here to do other fields and other values, or do some calculation or whatever else I need to do before saving this record. That's the second method. The third method is through the data access layer. The data access layer provides you 6 events that are important for you to remember. They are inserting, updating, deleting, and then the inserted, updated, and deleted events. So there are 6 events that you can essentially handle in order to do your work, the before and the after for insert, update, and delete effectively. And hopefully that will cover all of the ones that you need, essentially. So in the case of an audit trail for essentially when the database is, when a new data is being inserted, you would handle the inserting record event. And this event is raised just before record is being inserted, inline or stored procedure. And all you need to do is essentially implement your, set the values yourself effectively for the record. And same thing with updating. And updating will be, event will be raised whenever you are updating the record into the database effectively. This is all set in the business layer, and you are able to then essentially add it into the table name record class. Now, we make it very easy for you to implement this. You can go to IronSpeed Designer, go to Customize, bring up the code customization wizard. I usually collapse the tree so I can see the major lines, major sections over here. So I've got Audit, set Audit field on Insert. I select that, press the Next button. I select this particular page is for employees, but I'm implementing this at the data access layer, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to set for the employees table, and I'm going to select an audit field, let's say hire data as an example. And I'll press Next, shows me sample, goes ahead and press Finish. It automatically places the code in the right place. Here's my audit insert. It handles the inserting record event, and it shows me some sample code here that I can then essentially implement over here. So in fact, all I would need to do is do something like hire date equal to date time dot now, for example. That's how simple it is for you to implement the audit trail from an inserting perspective. You could, of course, do exactly the same thing for the update as well, and select set audit fields on update and go through that same process as well. So with that, that's the audit trail code customization example. I'll be happy to